All right. Well, we're going to be doing something that is, I think, unusual today. Uh, I've noticed that in the past months and maybe in the past few years, there's been an increasing number of people who take a technical test at a company like Google or Facebook, and they're doing a screen capture or recording of their session with somebody who's leading them through a problem, and who's doing this sort of technical voir diring. Voir dire means is this sort of legal thing that has crept into the tech community. But it all comes down to not wanting to hire somebody that doesn't have a certain level of technical ability that you're hiring them to be able to handle. And it's been interesting to watch some of these videos, see what kind of criteria they're using, see what it is they're asking the candidates to do, and how they're leading the candidates on. And I've been on both sides of these technical interviews over the years. I have some complaints about the way they work, but it's been interesting that people feel like they could screen capture their own technical interview and their own foibles or their successes and post that online for other people to see. I think that's pretty interesting. But you might correct me if I'm wrong here in the comments, but I don't think that I've ever seen anybody make a video from the other side. I'm not sure. I just haven't come across one where there's a video where they say, let's look at a candidate's code and do a technical breakdown of what kind of things we looked at, what we saw, and show that perspective. So that's what I wanted to do today. And part of that is part of this whole process of finding a different way to do this whole thing. I think so many companies are spending a lot of time doing technical interviews, and I think that they're also accidentally biased in terms of the fact that they're getting people who are good at that interview. They're getting good people who are good at confidently whiteboarding a solution to a technical problem. Okay, so I think this is becoming more of an obvious problem in tech culture lately because we're seeing that companies are becoming over reliant on that. And I can tell you that there's been tech companies where that is the only thing they wanted to do in the interview process was whiteboard programming tests. Okay, so I think that misses other things. It misses whether someone is a dynamic personality, whether they have energy, whether they're interested, whether they have creativity. And a lot of technical interviews end up giving you entirely a pass on creativity during the technical interview because it's hard to be creative on the spot. So what I've done is created this chess program, and it it's letting me kill a couple birds with one stone because I can steer people who want to learn towards this video series on this program, and it the video series takes you through as a novice who maybe knows just enough about programming or maybe took a class on a particular programming language, but the new thing is something like JavaScript and React. This is where 90% of the companies are working these days, especially in the startup world, or the big FANG companies want you to be able to code like this. So there's a video series, and there's a well curated set of branches that take you through part one, part two, part three. But this also lets me then have a master branch with the finished product to see we're working towards. And it's not a complicated program; it's just chess. But it has some obvious features in it. And then since this is a public repository, I can say to candidates also, take a look at this code and add something to it, and then get back to me with a pull request. And so that's what we're going to look at today. And I don't want to pick on this person. This is just allows us to look at something that is in a public repository. Anybody can go to this pull request. It may end up getting closed or merged. I'm not sure yet, but I just want to take a look at it and talk through some of the criteria. And I think that, what I've been thinking that's interesting about this exercise is that usually you really don't have any insight into what the technical interviewer was even thinking about or noticing about your code, or it's a different perspective when you're trying to figure out, will somebody be good in a particular role. And if you spend your whole career on one side of that process, then the other side of it feels like a total mystery. And I know that until I started to interview other people and look at what they were doing, it was a mystery to me too. So it's what I wanted to capture with this video. And the really hard part is that I may note things, I may point out things, but it's really hard. I think every technical interviewer really suffers from whether or not they are picking on something or noticing something. And I think that's a really important distinction. I think people, especially if you've written some code, you have a tendency to feel that it's your baby, that you did it right, and criticism feels very personal. And I think that's also one of the reasons employers wouldn't have made this kind of video up until now, because you don't want to sort of drive someone away. You don't want to make things difficult. It's like this thing where it feels very difficult and it feels like a challenging conversation to have with somebody. And a lot of times, technical people get it's a very antisocial thing to tell somebody that they're wrong, or that something's wrong with what they did, or point out flaws in people, or point out flaws and that actually antisocial problem is a problem for a lot of very technical people, because they just will say they know that there are flaws, and they'll just say them without having a tactful way to do that, or maybe they feel they don't have time to do that. But I just want to go through this code real quick. We got a submission, and it won't take long, just a few minutes, but we're going to note a few things, and that's about it. This is not going to necessarily say this got us to the bar that meant that this person was hired, but this is going to maybe inform us about what level they at are. And I think that's really difficult. There's very coarse levels. There's interns, there's junior people, there's senior people, and there are the industry has tried to come up with the idea that there are 10Xers too, or ninjas, and I don't know that I believe in that. I think that there's a few different types of that kind of person. There's somebody who could be very creative, someone with great aesthetics, someone who understands how to design great products. There are also people who are brilliant coders partially because they're so antisocial that they spend all of their time coding. And it's a difficult thing to balance out and compare various people to. So that was all of my caveats. Let's jump into this. This is the base program. It has a few features. You can back up through your history. You can go back through it. At some point, if you back up and you do a different move, you can do something else, and now it saves an alternative sequence for you. It keeps track of who's moving. It's white to move, so if you click on a black piece, it doesn't let you move it. If you click on a white piece, it will figure out where you can move the piece. So very basic program, and you can look at the video series to see how I made each step along the way. Actually, I don't even think I've finished the YouTube series yet. But we'll see. So let me switch this over to, I'm going to switch this code over to their submission from their pull request. And then we'll start it again and we can see what that person added. This will just take a second. Okay, and that's brought it up so we can see side by side how the two compare. We've got the original, and then we can switch over to this is their submission. Um, so design wise, what we've got is pretty obvious. We got a timer over here, and obviously, I think I want to stop it now because I'm not ready to play a game. It just started counting the instant we loaded. Apparently, let's see. One, yeah. Um, and So just looking at this design, it's sitting on top of our history. I don't know that I would put it there as far as aesthetic design. And again, this is one of those things where am I noticing something or am I picking on something? And I think this is more of a noticing thing. Like if I was going to design something with a chess clock, maybe I'd have it be on either side of the board or something, and have white over here, black, or maybe it would just be to the right in this real estate. Um, Putting it in the history is not bad. I think this bar lends itself to having more stuff in it, more options or settings, and there's really no other choice than to put it above the history because you don't want to put it below because that's a variable length thing. It's just going to get longer and longer. I think that the person coding it thought about some of these issues and where should I put it. Oh, here's an obvious place, so that's good. But if I have one nitpick about how, so here's the really hard part about looking at something like this. I have. Let's look at some code for a second. Okay, here's some code. Can I make this bigger? Yeah, sweet. Okay, this is 400 and yeah, okay, it's more than I thought. It's 436 lines of chess minutia. Okay, this is stuff I wrote because I know how to play chess, and I just made it so that okay, how does each piece move? A rook can move this way and that way. A knight can move this way, and each one of these is just a piece moving. A bishop can move this way. I have little to-dos in here. If somebody was like big into chess, then maybe they would add this feature, en passant for a pawn. Nobody knows what en passant is. I know, like, I've met two people in my whole life that knew what an en passant was, and one person successfully used it. Okay, so knowing this specific domain is not necessarily germane. Okay, but that's tricky a little bit, and let's do a little thing here. Off screen. I'm gonna Google something. So we added a timer to this chessboard, right? Chess timer. Okay. When you Google chess timer, you get two. I even looked at this one. I wanted to buy this. You get two clocks, and I mean, I think this is one of those times where you would find the you would find that most interviewers would not hold it against you that you didn't know that a particular minutia of a game worked a certain way. Okay, but it's something to note. That I mean, it's sort of it's the first thing that comes up when you Google it in the images. So there is a signal there. Did this person put a lot of thought into the product or whatever? What were they trying to showcase? Okay, so I guess whenever you're looking at a technical example of someone's work, you want to think, what are they trying to showcase? So like, somebody could have come into this code and they could have made it so that all the code was cleaner, right? Or they could have made it so that they put in some debugging tool that they were trying to showcase, and they had written the debugging tool. I don't know, or maybe all they did was come up with like a plan to market it, or maybe they wrote a, there's a lot of possible things that you could do even as a layperson. If you're, I haven't even ruled out the fact that I might show this to somebody who's working in just about any position and say, come up, like let's say I was going to hire a lawyer, and I said, come up with a plan to get this into the market from a legal perspective. What do we have to think about? And then that lawyer could showcase, well, okay, we've got to think about copyright, and we've got to think about, are the moves that we're recording copyrighted? Or, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know. But there could be just a whole litany of things that a lawyer could showcase and say, whatever. But so, yeah, what is somebody trying to show us, I think, is important. And what didn't they show us is also just as important. What didn't come across. So that's the only reason I want to note something like that. So in other words, even if I decide that this person has passed whatever bar we've set, I wouldn't want to accept this PR just on the face of it being a bad representation to other programmers. There may be a programmer who is super into chess and just couldn't believe, I've run into people like this. A lot of programmers have this, they can't believe that other people don't know what they know, and they're very put off if something is perceived as being incorrect to them. And we'll see examples of that in my own code too. That's not to say that I don't have stuff like that. But that's just sort of jumps out at me right off the bat. So let's look at some of the actual code, and to do that, I like to look at the actual pull request. So here's our Chess Lab GitHub page, and you can see that we've got a couple of forks, and let's go into their pull request. Added a timer to the app. Okay, very cool. Added a timer to app to track length of each game. Also, they had to change React strips from 3.3 to 3.4. Okay, that's probably because they're using Windows or something, and it probably didn't work with whatever toolchain they had going. So let's look at, if we go over to commits, we can see a diff of the entire commit. And whoa, is it big? Okay. So right off the bat, what I see here is we've got some new CSS. That's good. And it's not much. See, this is good. I like to see that someone is trying to keep CSS relatively to a minimum. I don't like a ton of CSS. It's very difficult to debug. You can do more with less with CSS. Okay, so that's good. And we, just make it look like it fits in. That's fine. So right off the bat, I'm having trouble seeing what are the actual changes, and that's because, so when you fire up Visual Studio Code, for example, one of the things that gives you the option to do is format a document. Control-Shift-I. I think Control-F might work too. Let's see. No, Control-Shift-I. Yeah, look at that. It changed all kinds of crap. This is huge. And part of this is because I wrote some of this code in Vim, and part of it's because I never formatted it because I don't care. But it's interesting that they did that when they added to the app. Let me Control-Z that. I don't want to commit that. So here's the app that they changed, and they went ahead and hit Format Document, and it made a lot of changes to whether there's spaces here. Okay, so that means that most of this commit is going to be stuff like that. So, and let's see. There's a way you can tell GitHub to ignore whitespace. W equals 1. So hopefully that's going to be a smaller commit. And it looks like it's still getting things, even though we're saying no white space. Hide white space changes. I'm not even sure why it changed. It's claiming this was a remove, delete. This looks all the same to me. Oh, maybe their new line character changes here. It looks the same to me though, except for the addition of timer comp. There we go. So that's a new thing, timer comp. But most of the rest of this looks like white space changes. Yeah, this got turned into one line, which is, a stylistic thing. I really hate that IDEs, this is a side problem, by the way, this goes back decades. The first IDE that I ever used was, I don't know, Borland C++. Um, and eventually things like Dev, Bloodshed. But for years, Eclipse was the worst about making bad options very easy. Eclipse used to do this awful thing where it would expand imports and it would suggest that you should catch every exception in its own block. And usually you don't want to do anything. Usually you want in Java to throw all the exceptions and handle them like at the top of the loop or at the top of the program and say, hey, there was an exception. Unless you're going to actually be able to handle an exception. I've seen so much code that because Eclipse said do this, there were all kinds of crazy problems because they were returning different crap from an exception or ignoring an exception or not printing that there was an exception or something. Like if you're still, God forbid, writing Java and you're doing anything other than throwing an exception in 90% of the cases of getting an exception, is because Eclipse is poisoning you against the idea that you can just throw an exception. So anyway, this problem goes back a long ways, and now Visual Studio Code is at a point where it will Control F format something. It's very easy, and it makes this very noisy commit. And it does stylistic things that I don't even care for. The idea that you're going to stick this ampersand thing on the same line, it's noise. It doesn't matter. Or the spaces. I actually get really annoyed with a Visual Studio Code for the way they want to cuddle else blocks. I don't like that at all. That used to be a major faux pas back in the day. And now somehow that style won, and it's not clear to me that anybody ever actually thought about it. So that's completely a side rant. It really doesn't have anything to do with evaluating this person other than the fact that they clearly use Visual Studio Code and hit Control F. And that's completely a normal, good thing to do. I absolutely cannot fault somebody for that. It actually shows that they did something. It shows that they were trying to understand the code better. They're used to seeing it a certain way, whatever. Very easy to do. But it does make it harder to find what they did in here. Like, I'm not even sure where their submission is in here. Let's see. So somewhere they added this timer comp, right? And that seems to be the only thing that got added for real, right? So maybe we can find that. There we go. Okay, so it's really one line of code that got added here, just above history, to the app. So we've added the timer comp. This person knows how to use React. That's good. They encapsulated it, and they're showing that they can do React encapsulation. So that's good. Let's check. So it seems like the heart of their stuff here is gonna be this component, and they put it in the right place. So they know how to use React, right? So that's a good thing. They know how to manipulate this, and they know their tool chain. So here we go, timer.js. That's what they added. So before I get into looking at that too deeply, I have one more side rant, which is completely unrelated to this. And it's like, I can't even figure out why yarn is a thing. It's really reminds me of Ant. If anybody remembers Ant from the 2000s. There was a bunch of projects that I was on back then where, Ant would take 5 minutes to compile something. And it was ridiculous. It was this big bunch of garbage that would always have problems. And I could replace a many thousand line Ant script with 4 lines of a script program that said pipe every xargs of Java files into Java-C and just run the Java compile routine directly, and it would take 100 milliseconds sometimes. And I mean, people were sitting there waiting for these compiles to happen when they could snap their fingers. I mean, I never understood why Ant became popular, and I don't understand why Yarn has now become popular, because I have never seen a case made for Yarn other than it wasting your time and creating a 10,000 line. This is a 10,000 line file for a chess program that is... The chess program itself is less than 1,000 lines, maybe about 1,000 lines of code. The fact that we're using React is a big thing. Okay, so there's a bunch of React shit in here. I get that, and the package lock JSON is what we're really seeing. But I mean, this is useless information. I hate that Yarn does this. I always try to get rid of it, and usually you can really easily get rid of Yarn, right? It doesn't. But there's another case where it's like, I don't like Yarn, but I don't really care that someone else likes Yarn. That's not what I think any person who's doing a technical interview actually cares about. Usually there will be some kind of like winning tool chain and stylistic set at a company that sort of everybody decides on, and there's a couple ways to go about that. And here's an insight for you. If you are going through a technical interview and the interviewer asks if you have any questions for them, ask them how their team resolves those kinds of problems. Ask them, because there's two different ways of solving it. There's somebody who's in charge and who is in charge of, the Kanban board and all that kind of shit. And they're saying, we're going to cuddle else. We're going to use Yarn. We're going to, everybody's going to use Visual Studio Code, and that's life, get over it. Or is there a process by which maybe everybody sits down and votes? Is there a process by which it's a free-for-all, and whose ever code is accepted wins, I've worked in all of those environments, and they all have their different problems. If you're working in a area where it's a free-for-all, that's just as frustrating, because for someone like me who tends to use Vim because I'm old, somebody will come in and stomp all over my commits with a bunch of white space horse hockey. Someone will convince someone to put in a linter, and it'll drive everybody else crazy. But nobody will say that it's driving them crazy, because it doesn't really, it's not that important. It's not important enough to complain about, but it's sort of wasting everybody's time. And then it's just as bad to have somebody who's very dictatorial and says, this is the build. You have to use this Docker thing for your backend, and you have to use this, and you have to use that, and here's your computer. And that's very chafing to work under. It suppresses creativity. And the other way of voting can be just as difficult too, because I don't know. Voting, I've seen that work successfully here and there. I remember voting on whether to use React or Angular at one point. And I think everybody voted for Angular, God forbid, but that was about 4 years ago. I don't think the vote would go that way now, because I feel like React has taken over so much more. So anyway, it looks like we just got this one file to really look at. That's where we're going to focus. And let's look at it in the code editor instead of GitHub. Here it is, components, timer.js. And it's nice that when somebody notices, okay, you're organizing your code that way. So that's really good. The only thing I'll say is that this is... I want to put this in as charitable a way as possible, because I feel like every time I interview and do a technical interview, and every time I've been in a technical interview, everybody bends over backwards to acknowledge that it's not necessarily a bad thing. Okay, but let's just say this code is short. Okay, so I mean, if you're a programmer right off the bat, that's going to be the first thing you notice. And that might be fine if it was also really showcasing elegance. And I do like, here's what I like about this code. I like that they pulled in a obvious choice for a library. Okay, so the fact that this code is short tells me this person knows how to find the appropriate library, and that can be very powerful, especially in the React programming sphere. You know, to say we need a thing, let's bring in this library, synthesize it into the program, and have it do what we need. And I think that's great. Okay, let's look at this library actually. React compound timer. All right, let's take a look. There we go. It's been increasing in popularity. That's always a great sign because that means it's well looked after. It looks very simple to use. Okay. So here I'm already thinking about, like, in terms of how I would approach problems. And it's really difficult to try and look at some code and think about this from a non-technical, like from a technical perspective. I'm going to say, good job. You know, you've done it. It works. It compiles. It uses the library as it was meant to be used by this. It shows that this person understands both the way that this works with this React fragment thing, which I tend to not have to use that much, but that's it shows that somebody understands what's going on. They know how to use this thing, right? So from a technical perspective, I'm gonna say that this person knows this is a good example, okay? But from an employer perspective, I'm looking at this from like three other dimensions, and I think employers are second guessing themselves a lot too. So you've got to understand, I think, if you're an employee who's doing this kind of thing, that there may be so many hidden variables that you just can't even guess. Like, there's going to be people who are second guessing themselves, maybe who have never even done technical interviews, or they've done so many that they're commoditizing it and they don't know what they're looking for. But you know, as an example, let me show you some thinking here. Okay, so I'm thinking about, when I think about what I'm working towards, I'm thinking about making products. And like, okay, so we've been talking for 22 minutes. That's good to know. But so there's two problems I have here. Okay, so if you look at how a chess clock works, you're going to see, okay, there's two clocks. It's really two. But I see two other things that are jumping out at me right off the bat from looking at this library. And one of them is, does it count backwards? A chess clock counts backwards, which, you know, so like, let's say you figured out that there are two clocks. Okay. Are you going to count them forwards? Maybe, because maybe you're thinking, okay, you know, that allows people to decide how long they want it to go for, or something like that. And then you don't need to put in like a certain, but you know, let's say if I was going to productize this, I might want to make it so that, okay, there's an initial time. I might be thinking, okay, I don't want to autoplay. Definitely, like when we start this game, it starts. And I mean, that's, you know, that's not really good gameplay, regardless of whether you know chess. I feel like it's not good gameplay to start a timer as soon as the page loads. You know, you haven't said start a game. There's a start button here. Okay, so we can stop it, reset it, good. Start it, okay, good. But I mean, it's not auto. So I guess to fix this, we would do initial time 0. That's good. So we could do autoplay false, right? Autoplay equals false. Is that gonna do it? Yep, that did it. Oh no, that didn't do it. Maybe this library is broken. Start immediately. I had no autoplay, but it started immediately. Classic code problem. Okay. Start immediately. There we go. Oh, I did it in the div too. That's another problem. see what we got. All right, there we go. Refresh, and it's not starting. Okay. So one little change, I feel like I made it more of a there's a consideration for the user type thing here, you know. And and here's another thing where it's like this is not a technical complaint. This is a noticing something. Like I notice that I can put in the ability to stop to not start immediately. And I know as somebody who makes products for users that that's going to be what they want. A lot of times the creativity is based on guessing like what is it that people want? What is it that's going to make their life easier? And if you come into, let me control Z this, it's just not going to make someone's life easier if they want to use a chess program to be using a chess program that you're thinking, why is the timer started? Okay, I got to stop it. As soon as there's another click, you've messed up. From a product design perspective. And, you know, this interviewee may not be looking for a product design position. So that goes back to, you know, it's not really fair to pick on that kind of thing. But it's one of those notice things. It's one of those things that's like, let's try and come up with a picture of this person. I actually feel like in some ways this whole exercise got some of that. You know, it showed us a little slice. How elegant is this person's code? What is their they found exactly where they wanted to put it in. They found in the code how to do it. They know how to work with those libraries and pull things in. So you know, you can't fault their technical competence. Start, pause, resume. So you know the ordering of these buttons: start and pause, resume, reset. I like the resets on the bottom. Start and stop, resume and pause maybe go together more from just a perspective of design. But you know, this isn't a design kind of challenge. Maybe this person doesn't want to showcase their design, and they're saying, "Hey, I'm a technical guy." You know, I'm not saying this person's saying that, but it's you know, these are the kind of things that an employer is guessing at, and I think that employers don't want to say what their criteria are for two reasons, and one of them is that the thing that bothers me the most, and the reason I made this video, is that I think too many employers see their hiring criteria as some kind of gotcha secret. I've been in interviews with several companies that definitely had this mindset. And it wasn't necessarily the company's fault. I think it was this culture of, it used to be that managers would hire people and they realized they were annoying technical people because a lot of times managers don't have the technical competency to voir dire somebody. But I think managers also realized that this technical interviewing thing, it's a ton of work. Even if I'm a hotshot programmer, I don't want to spend all my time doing technical interviews with people. So that gets pushed to junior employees. And I've been in that you know, that started years ago. When I was a junior programmer, I absolutely got handed, hey, look at this person and evaluate their technical ability without any criteria or training or any information about what we were looking for. Just, you have technical skills, so evaluate this person technically. And there was no existing book on how to do that. So you make it up and you're nervous and you want to have a few gotchas in there, and you know, you don't want somebody to know what the gotchas are ahead of time and be able to say, oh, it's this, you know, because then if they knew it ahead of time, obviously that's not as fair as somebody spontaneously getting the answer right because you gave them a riddle and you've somehow proved that something about them. And here's my chief complaint about that. Usually those are creative things. I've been asked for things that were creative applications of technical abilities in plenty of interviews, nobody is able to separate the two. I don't care how experienced you are with technical interviews, and the more experienced people get with technical interviews, the less worthwhile it is, because the more it focuses on leading the person just to showcase the answer you're looking for. And anybody with any technical ability is going to be able to do that. All you're doing at that point is making it a determination that they sort of they haven't made an extreme lie on their resume. But you haven't set any kind of actual bar, and no, I don't think anybody's going to have such an extreme lie on their resume that says they have some high level of technical competence, and it turns out they don't. That used to be more of a problem. That used to be a problem in back in the late '90s and the early 2000s, when you had people with a lot of certifications would pop up with Net Plus and A Plus certification, and they'd try and say they were, this and that kind of level of experience and qualification, and it was not necessarily true. And the hard part for employers, I think, was that there's just as many self-taught people who absolutely killed it during that era, and there still are. I mean, hopefully my chess program is the kind of thing that you could look at the YouTube videos, you could look at the GitHub code, and you could figure out how to work in React, and you could spend a lot of time learning and bringing yourself along, and eventually be given a chance by a company that maybe wants a part-timer, and you could prove yourself there, and you could learn some more, and then you could network and get opportunities. I mean, the university route definitely still is not the only way to go. It's just that it qualifies you, and it's super challenging to mix technical and creative qualifications together the way we do in programming. And I think, like, if you were to look at this, you might have a ton of complaints about the design of this. The colors are garish. I'm not necessarily trying to showcase the colors. I don't necessarily care. If somebody wants to pick on me for that. The difference is, I think the important thing is to be confident about what you show, and to not take criticism personally. But I might make a few more of these videos as other submissions get put in. But that's all I really wanted to showcase, was what kinds of thing. I feel like it's a gotcha even to say, here's this, and to not have this video out there for somebody to look at and to have a good understanding of what it is that they're in for from a technical. I've submitted code that was like this to companies and said, here's an example of my code, and then just never heard back. I think everybody's in the tech world has had that kind of experience where you just get no feedback on your code, and you just have no idea what kind of criteria they were using, or if they even looked at it. So I wanted to show that I think usually there's a ton of care that goes into trying to evaluate people in a fair way. Whether or not that works or not, I don't think that we have good processes or solutions for that. You can't take a hiring technical interviewers 101 class, so maybe that's helpful to somebody else out there. I don't know, but I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you could stomach all of my sort ofs and what ifs and so whats and all that. And if you have any thing that I missed pointed out, if you think I'm wrong, tell me. Thumbs up, thumbs down, I don't care. No skin off my ass. But I hope you have a good day, and I really do appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. I had fun making it, so.